Now that I've read and analyzed the prompt, I'm ready to start brainstorming some examples. Any good brainstorming list is going to have more than 1 or 2 options. I might have 5 or 6 when I'm done and pick my best few that I can work with. So it asks me whether globalization is ultimately good for the world. And I'm going to think of some examples here. Now, there are examples that are going to pop into everyone's heads, right? Cell phones or Facebook or planes. I could start there, but if I want to show the way I can think in a complex manner, the way that I can show the graders a more innovative approach to this essay, if they're reading 1,000 essays about cell phones, I'll try to get past that. So instead of writing down cell phones and planes, I'm going to think of some other examples of globalization that I know about. It says sharing economies, ideas, and cultures. Globalization. I'm going to talk about, with economies, I can talk about the euro, the currency of the European Union, and how all these countries in Europe banded together and made one currency for themselves rather than different ones. That's just a little bit more specific than saying something like credit cards or something more generic. Globalization of ideas. Globalization of ideas. It's a good cultural phenomenon that isn't a cliche. It's not the, social media is changing us type idea. Sometimes as I'm thinking, I'll go back to the previous thing, international trade, ideas. So here's something that's globalized, actually, is women's rights movements. The idea that women deserve the right to vote, the right to be educated, is an idea that has circulated around the world. It's not just isolated within each individual country. So by talking about women's rights, and how globalization has impacted women, I can talk about something a little bit different than what maybe somebody else might mention. And then cultures. What are some examples in culture of globalization? How might social media or TV change all of us? Transportation, communication technologies. Maybe I'll also talk about the spread of the English language. That as we become more global, English language education is more valuable as a language that a lot of people speak. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, maybe. So I'll talk about that as well. Again, I actually already came up with 3 or 4 examples, but I'm trying to stay away from the most obvious. Now here's the thing. I just came up with 3 things that I think maybe have worked pretty well. The euro has been broadly successful. Women's rights have spread around, and that's, I think, a good thing. And the English language, there's some pros and cons, but it's provided a common language for a lot of people. So those are sort of positive. I'm asking whether globalization is ultimately good for the world. And even if I want to say I believe personally that globalization has ultimately been good for the world, it did talk about earlier in here the discord among social classes. So there's some problems with globalization. So maybe I'll make a separate little brainstorm list for problems. 1 or 2 things that have messed up the world because of globalization. So maybe something like, globalization, actually related to language, right, has caused the decline of other languages. They're called extinct languages, actually, some of them, because no one speaks them anymore. Because people are being educated in English or in French or some more global international language, their local languages die out. And that's a bad thing, I think. So now I found a way that in talking about English language, diffusing around the world as part of globalization, there's a drawback, which is that local languages, traditional languages die out. And so maybe I can embrace some of this complexity as I think about my thesis. The point is this, there's no better example or worse example. The examples have to be relevant. They actually have to be examples of things that are global or connecting the world in a different way. And I need to be thinking in a complex way of how I can argue that globalization is ultimately good, but that there are some drawbacks as well. This is going to set me up really well when I write my thesis.